I remember the sensation clearly. It was as if time had stood still, as if the air around me had grown denser, thicker, more sacred. It wasn't fear, not in that first instant. It was a strange, almost reverent silence, as if the heavens were waiting for me. And it was there, in the middle of my sermon, before a packed hall, that something impossible happened. People were dying. Yes, they were dying, but not the way the movies show it, with flashing lights and angels playing harps. It happened instantly, without warning, without poetry, an abrupt rupture between what I believed about God and who God truly is. I had been preaching with power, speaking of holiness and purity, of how God rejects the lukewarm, but that night, the pulpit became an altar of judgment, and the judgment was for me. First came the physical pain, pressure in my chest, a crack of agony shooting through me like an electric wire, and then the flash. People were falling. The sisters screamed, some ran, others prayed, but I was no longer there. As the hall filled with panic, my soul was swept away to another place, a place where words are worthless, where you cannot hide who you are. There, it is the Spirit who speaks, and what he says is not sound, it is truth. In that place, I found myself stripped, for the first time, of the armor of religion. Before that, had anyone asked who I was, I would have answered with pride, Iona Zykala, 59 years old, a widow's mother of a daughter estranged from the church, and an evangelist for over 3 decades, and I would have said it with my head held high. I thought it was a beautiful life, but in that place, none of that mattered. What mattered was what my heart carried without my knowing it, and what it carried was not merely zeal, it was vanity, arrogance, a sense of superiority that led me to pass judgment in God's name. I grew up in a Baptist church. I learned to distinguish right from wrong at a very young age, and I believed it was my mission to point out errors. The young woman's short skirt, the effeminate boy in the back seat, the single mother trying to start over. To me, they were all grounds for a reprimand. I wielded Bible verses like a knife, and, worse yet, I was proud of it. I believed I was guarding the holiness of the church, but there, outside my body, I began to understand that holiness without compassion turns into sheer pride in the name of faith. I looked down and saw a body. A woman was trying to resuscitate me, another was weeping and screaming for help, and I, hovering above the scene, felt torn. On one hand, confusion, so this is how it ends. On the other, an absurd peace, a peace that spoke without saying a word. A presence began to draw me in, gently but irresistibly. It was an almost loving invitation, as if to say, the time has come to see what you never wanted to see, and I went, because in that place, no one resists. The soul knows when it is time to listen. The further I moved from the room, the more I felt I was entering a dimension where nothing existed to make me feel safe. I held no Bible, there was no pulpit, no microphone, only me, my spirit, and the raw truth coursing through me like fire. And there, I began to remember everything, not with nostalgia, but with shame. Images assailed me like arrows, fiery sermons, harsh judgments, wounded faces. The sister who wept in the restroom, the young man who never returned, the daughter told it was a disgrace that she was pregnant. I said that, I did it out of love, but then I understood, you used my name, but you didn't use my heart. This phrase wasn't spoken, it felt like a phrase etched into my soul, and it hurt more than any correction. And then, the moment I'll never forget arrived. The light around me changed, the air thickened. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. It was as if the universe held its breath, and without warning, I was there. I didn't see any face, I didn't see any throne, there was no music. I was simply there in Jesus Sampero, not the Jesus of the paintings, nor the one from the sermons. He was more, he was everything, and at the same time, he was alone. He didn't need to look at me. His presence already exposed me, and there, on my knees, disembodied, I knew I didn't know the gospel. I knew religion, honey, and now I stood before the author of grace, stripped of arguments and filled with the guilt I myself never wanted to see. I couldn't hide, not even in my own thoughts. It was as if every memory now had sound, smell, and pain, not the pain I felt, but the pain I caused. I saw a young woman weeping in secret because I told her she was revealing herself. I saw a young man leave the church with slumped shoulders after hearing my sermon against bad company. I saw my own daughter sitting on the steps listening to me tell her she was a scandal to the gospel, and it all came back, but not as a memory. It was as if I were reliving it scene by scene through the eyes of someone who suffered. There was no defense there, only revelation. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him I was trying to protect the altar, that sin had to be fought, that I was only doing what the prophets did, but he gave me no room, not with words, not with his presence. The presence of Jesus exposed everything without shouting. There was no accusation, no voice, only a weight of truth that pierced my spirit like a sharp knife. And it was there that the phrase, "You used my name, but you did not use my heart," struck me. That phrase burned inside me like pure fire. I had preached about Jesus, but I hadn't lived it, and worse, I used the Bible as armor to hide my hardened soul. Then, something changed. Images began to appear around us as if I were inside my own story, only now it wasn't a narrative I controlled. It was a mirror, a painful reflection of what I had become. I heard myself saying, "To those who like rebuke, God doesn't mix with sin. This is no place for disorder," and each of these phrases was answered with a scene: the pregnant young woman who left crying, the young man who never returned, the sister who changed churches, Yale New Fundo. I began to understand that I wasn't defending holiness, I was deciding who deserved God's love. It was at that moment that he spoke, not with a voice, but with life. John 3:1, a verse I knew by heart, one I had preached hundreds of times. But this time it didn't come as a text, it came like a sword. It wasn't a Bible school motto, it wasn't a phrase on a conference poster, it was a living revelation, as if each word took on color, pulse, and eternal weight, because God so loved the world. And in that, I saw the cross, I saw the blood, I saw the price, and I saw that he treated this love as if it were mine, a gift I could choose. I fell from knees. Even without a physical body, the soul has postures, and mine collapsed. Shame, repentance, anguish, but also mercy, because no matter how ashamed I felt, I was not rejected. Jesus looked at me without hatred, without contempt. He read me, he knew me, and yet he loved me. And then he showed me something even deeper. I knew the text, but I did not know the heart of the writer. That shattered me because it was true. I defended the letter but failed to convey it, and that came at a high cost, to me and to many around me. There, I realized that the gospel I preached brought no healing. It hurt because it was built on rules rather than redemption, on law rather than grace. I thought I was saving people, but I was driving them away. The Bible I had used as a shield became a mirror, revealing my greatest terror. It wasn't just being harsh, it was being unfeeling, and what he said next sealed it. You were not called to protect the gospel, you were called to live it, and living it means allowing it to destroy you from the inside out. Only then can he rebuild you. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I would either return changed, or I wouldn't return alive. When you truly see Jesus, all excuses vanish, not because he shouts, but because his presence lays everything bare. That is exactly what happened to me. There was no throne, no multitude of angels, there was only him, and he was everything. He didn't accuse me, yet seeing myself as I truly was, that alone made me fall apart. Every harsh word I had spoken, every cold gesture I had masked as zeal, every time I had used the Bible to wound rather than heal, it all came alive again, not merely as a memory, but as a stark, undeniable reality. And there, without a body, without a pulpit, without defenses, I was merely a naked soul standing before the truth. He began to show me scenes one by one, as if my life were a spiritual film, yet it wasn't merely visual. I felt what others had felt. I wept for the pain I had caused. I trembled at the shame I had brought upon others. I saw the young woman in the miniskirt looking at the floor when I mentioned her during the service. I saw the young man leave the church without looking back. I saw my daughter listening as I told her she was a disgrace to the gospel, and I felt her heart breaking. With every scene, a question burned deep within my soul. Why did you drive them away? This question didn't arise as a mere thought, it surged like living fire within my spirit. It was as if Jesus was saying, "They were mine, I died for them, and you drove them away with your harsh words." And the worst punishment wasn't hearing that, but realizing it was true. I had always claimed I did it out of love, but here, the truth was clear. Much of what I called love was actually control. Much of what I called zeal was fear, fear of losing what I had built, fear of feeling incompetent, fear of seeing that my theology was flawed. I tried to justify it. I tried to find verses and turn to the scriptures, just as I had done all my life, but Jesus didn't argue with me. He simply showed me what his heart saw, and what he saw was a woman who had lost herself in the religious system. I had defended doctrine but forgotten the essential thing: love, not a permissive, weak, or cheap love, but a love that restores, uplifts, and listens before speaking. I knew all the rules, yet I didn't know how to love as he loves, and now, I stood before him with nothing to offer but ruins. That was when John 3:16 resonated once again, but not merely as a phrase. It was like living a spiritual experience. Each word was both a hammer blow and an embrace. For God so loved the world, and I, who thought I knew this verse, realized I had never truly understood it. It is not just about salvation in itself, it is about surrender. It is about a God who loved before the person deserved it, and who gave his Son even knowing that many would reject him. This verse is not the beginning of the Bible, it is its backbone. Everything revolves around this, everything originates here, and in that moment, Jesus drew even closer, and what he showed me next still makes me wake up in the middle of the night with a tight chest and tears in my eyes. He didn't give me a list of corrections. He didn't scold me. He didn't point out my sins. He simply revealed a truth I had hidden even from myself, a truth that said, "You didn't understand anything, and yet I still love you." That completely disarmed me, because it was the kind of love that does not accuse, yet does not allow you to remain the same, the kind of love that destroys you from within only to rebuild you from there, the right way. I was kneeling or prostrate, I don't know for sure, without a body, without time, without a voice, only spirit, and the spirit knows when it's time to be silent. I felt shame, but it wasn't the kind of shame that paralyzes, it was the kind that purifies, that shows how much we still need to be broken in the presence of Jesus. There are no excuses, no defenses, there is light, and the light revealed to me, showed the past, not to condemn me, but to heal me. Each scene was an old wound reopening, not in others, but in me. Because now I saw what I never wanted to see in my faith, it was full of hardness and empty of compassion. I saw the impassioned sermons, the tense faces listening to me shout, the people shrinking in their pews, the averted eyes. I thought it was conviction, but it was fear in those who love reproof. But deep down I didn't know how to heal, I only knew how to warn, to correct, to shout, and in the end, the one shouting was my insecurity disguised as authority. I didn't need to be firm, I needed to be whole, but being whole hurts, and I ran from that for years, hiding behind doctrine, behind texts, behind a pulpit that gave me security, but now there was none of that. Solu, EU, and he saw me as whole, and that's how he began to read me with his eyes, with his spirit. It was as if every thought I had was being spoken aloud, as if every secret intention was being laid bare, and yet, he didn't look away. He didn't shame me. He didn't look away. He was there reading me, listening to me inside, and the more he read me, the more I crumbled, because I realized that even the good things I did were often driven by ego. I preached about renunciation, but I loved the applause. I spoke of humility, but I got irritated when I wasn't called upon to speak. He didn't interrupt me, but his silence screamed. It was as if the absence of words forced me to hear what I had never wanted to face, and then he did something that changed everything. He showed me the people I had hurt and how he had reached out to them. Then I saw Jesus approaching the young man I had excluded. I saw him embracing the single mother I had rebuked. I saw him wiping away the tears of the young woman I had criticized for her clothing, and I understood. While I walked away, he drew near, while I judged. He embraced me as I said, "Holiness or nothing," he said, "first grace, then change." This vision shattered me because I understood that even using his name, I was far from his heart, and not because of some scandalous sin, but because of a religiosity that blinded me. I thought I was a spokesperson for heaven, but I was closing doors with the very Bible I was meant to open. And then, voiceless, without any sound, Jesus released a word within me, John 3:16, for the third time. But this time it was as if the verse were a portal, a deciphered code. Each letter carried eternal weight, for God so loved the world, and I finally understood that it wasn't about who deserved it, but about who needed it, and it was at that moment that I accepted, you can't live the gospel without letting it destroy you from within. You can't feign passion when you're filled with anger. You can't use the Bible as a weapon and expect the wounded to return. Jesus wasn't there to argue doctrine, he was there to start over, and to start from I had to accept that everything I had built with pride had to fall. He didn't want to reform my faith, he wanted to tear out the rotten roots and plant something new, and in that sacred place where time ceased to exist, I answered, without a voice, but with my spirit, start from scratch, Lord, do it again, but this time, do it with the heart. At that moment, the surroundings began to change again. It wasn't a visual change, it was in the atmosphere, in the light. It no longer came from above, it was as if it were welling up from within me. Along with that light came a clarity that pierced right through me, mercilessly, yet without physical pain. It was an invisible surgery performed on my soul. And in the midst of this process, a new word resonated, Ezekiel 36:26, I will give you a new heart. As that promise took shape, I understood that Jesus didn't want to patch me up, he wanted to replace my inner self, to remove the old heart, petrified by religion, and give me a new one made of flesh. It was at this point that the layers began to fall away. Layers of hardness and self-defense regarding ideas I had considered absolute truths, layers of pride disguised as spiritual authority, layers of fear hidden behind memorized verses, layers that had accumulated over years within the church. I realized then that religiosity wasn't protecting me, it was hardening me, isolating me, and making me insensitive to what Jesus values most: the human soul. The compassion found in touching, embracing, and listening. I thought I was at war with sin, but without realizing it, I had become the jailer of those who needed to be set free. Jesus didn't give me a sermon, he gave me a mirror. In that mirror, he showed me that the doctrine I defended had become a prison, and I, unknowingly, was the one who had locked the doors. In the name of holiness, I had silenced the very stories he wanted to restore. In the name of truth, I silenced the confessions he wanted to hear. And there, stripped of arguments, I understood what I had never seen before. I was not called to defend the Bible as one defends a legal code. I was called to live out the gospel as someone saved by mercy, and to live in mercy means remembering every day that we, too, have been forgiven much. In that space where time ceases to exist, I felt something I had never experienced, not even during the most intense worship services. True repentance. Not guilt, but repentance born of the profound realization that I had failed people, and yet, he allowed me to feel his presence. He did not cast me aside. He did not condemn me. He drew me close, like a father looking at a daughter suffering deep within and saying, I know you, and yet I want to rebuild you, and that was what shattered me forever. His love did not ignore me, but neither did it allow me to go on as before. Returning to this world was no longer a matter of survival. It was a mission. I knew that if I returned, I would never be the same again. The pastor I once was had died there, the one who shouted, who imposed his will, who judged, the one who preached on John 3:1 without understanding it, the one who memorized verses but did not know the heart of the one who wrote them, the one who cast people out in the name of order but never knelt to, listening to those who were falling. That version of me was torn away, and what remained was someone who simply wanted to experience something as profound as the love of Jesus. Then I felt a sudden, sharp pain, real, physical. It was as if my body were pulling me backward. I opened my eyes slowly. Everything was white and cold. The hospital lights blinded me. There were machines, tubes, voices. I had returned. But I had returned different, and I knew it. Even though the doctors spoke of a miracle, no one then knew what had truly happened, because what Jesus did for me in that unseen place was far more than just giving me back my life. He brought me back to the gospel, the true gospel, the one that transforms from within first, and only then through the spoken word. The first thing I felt upon returning was pain, intense, searing pain, as if my own body were rejecting me. The white hospital light felt aggressive, air was forced in through the tubes. The sound of the machines cut through the silence like a blade. I couldn't speak, I could barely move my fingers, yet, inside, the cry was different. It wasn't fear, but a weight, the weight of what I had seen, of what I had understood. And how could I explain this? How could I translate an experience that had torn my soul apart into human language? I didn't know where to begin. I only knew that I would never again be the woman who had walked into that hall to preach. For the first few days, I barely spoke, not because I lacked a voice, but because I was afraid of being misunderstood, of people thinking I had lost my mind, afraid of saying too much and cheapening something sacred. And there was also the very real fear of realizing that, when I tried to explain, people listened only with their ears, not their hearts. I wept at night, not from physical pain, but from the chaos within. The woman reborn in that hospital bed no longer fit into the old pastor's clothes. I no longer knew how to preach the same way. How could I offer rebuke without betraying what Jesus had taught me? How could I step up to the pulpit without carrying a voice other than my own? The doctors called my regaining consciousness a miracle. They noted that the cardiac arrest had been prolonged and warned of potential after-effects. Yet, what they didn't know was that the deepest scars were neither in my brain nor my heart, but in my soul, scars that medical tests cannot detect. My hands trembled, I spoke slowly, and I felt like a stranger inside my own body. But the strangest sensation was spiritual, the presence that had surrounded me that continued to shape me. It was as if the awareness of eternity had clung to me, and that changes everything. The women from the church began to visit, bringing flowers, songs of praise, and declarations of victory. They would say, "God raised you up because He still has a purpose for you." I knew they were right, yet they could not grasp the nature of the transformation that had taken place, for what God did to me was not merely a miracle. Oh, it was a demolition. He didn't just heal me, He tore me down and then rebuilt me. And when I tried to speak of it, I saw the shift in people's gazes, their expressions darkening, the awkward silence of those unwilling to touch the altar they had built. It was as if I bore a message the church did not want to hear. I began to avoid visitors, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer knew where I fit in. Have you ever felt like a stranger in the place where you've lived your whole life? That is what it was like. I knew that setting, those voices, those hymns, but now everything sounded different. It was as if the Spirit were crying out within me, "It can never be the same again." And it was in the midst of this conflict that God began the true teaching. 3:917. He didn't want me to preach again, at least, not in the same way. He wanted me to learn to live, and to truly live out what I saw, heard, and felt. That would be the new preaching. It was a nurse who made me break my silence. She was so simple, calm, and attentive. She told me that while I was unconscious, I had said strange things with my eyes closed, that my face looked peaceful, and she asked if I remembered anything. It was then, with a still weak voice and a racing heart, that I began to tell her. The words came out haltingly, yet they held the truth, and as I spoke, she wept, not out of mere emotion, but because God wanted to touch her, too, through what He had done to me. Right there in that room, I understood. Perhaps God hadn't brought me back to preach more loudly, but to live more deeply. Returning home was like entering a familiar place with a stranger's soul. Everything looked the same. The furniture, the paintings, the Bible study books, but nothing inside me was the same. It was as if my soul had changed its pitch, yet the world was still out of tune. I tried to act normally, but even my breathing sounded different. The silence of the house made me hear things I had previously ignored, memories, glances, and phrases I had repeated for decades without realizing the harm they caused. The pulpit had made me hear many things, but pain taught me how to truly listen. I tried returning to church. I was met with hugs, smiles, and songs of gratitude. Some said, "You were chosen." Others said, "It's a sign of the end times," and perhaps they were right, but no one knew what had really happened to me. When I tried to explain that God had shown me something about love and judgment, the looks I received shifted, subtly, but noticeably. Enthusiasm turned to caution, affection turned to distance. It was as if I had touched something no one else wanted to touch, as if the revelation itself were a problem. For a moment, I thought about backing down, pretending nothing had happened, returning to the old rhythm, but something inside me wouldn't allow it. I could no longer repeat the old rhetoric, not for lack of conviction, but because I now knew that without compassion, all zeal turns into a hammer. I no longer wanted to strike, I wanted to embrace, to listen, and to extend a hand where I had once pointed a finger, but this comes at a price. The price of being misunderstood, of being judged by those who still confuse firmness with harshness. They called me a weak liberal, but I knew the truth. I wasn't losing my faith, I was finally finding Jesus, not the Jesus of clichés, but the one who sits with sinners, who touches the untouchable, and who brings down those who think themselves strong, only to lift them up with gentleness. I spent days in silence until I knelt alone in the living room, still weak, still trembling, yet willing. In that prayer, for the first time in years, I asked for nothing. I simply said, "Use me in your own way," and then I understood the calling. It was no longer about preaching with words. It was about preaching through presence, listening, empathy, tears, and patience. The pulpit was now the sidewalk, the supermarket checkout line, a phone call to someone who had drifted away, a visit to a sister the church had forgotten. Jesus didn't want to put me in the spotlight, he wanted to place me on the ground, and that is exactly what he began to do. I visited a young woman who had become pregnant out of wedlock. Before, I would have told her she needed to do better. Now, I simply listened. I wept with her, held her hand, and spoke to her of the son who was born so she could start anew. In that embrace, I felt Jesus again, not through lights or visions, but through simplicity, in the contact, the listening, and the space I made for grace to work. I reached out to a young man whom I myself had helped drive away. He received me with mistrust, and I didn't bring him doctrine. I brought him a request for forgiveness, and he wept, not because he wanted to argue, but because he saw that something in me had truly changed. That is what John 3:16 has become for me, a way of life. It is not merely the opening line of an evangelistic sermon, it is the map, not the destination. The essence is love. God did not observe first, did not weigh the cost first, did not verify worthiness first. Those who love simply give. Those who love do not wait for merit, they give even knowing they might be rejected. And it is this love that guides me now, for I came to understand that the gospel was not meant to be shouted, but lived, and living the gospel sometimes requires more silence than words, more tears than microphones, more reconciliation than correction. I used to think that having a calling meant being on stage, preaching boldly, being a prominent figure, keeping a packed schedule. Now, all of that seems insignificant. I realize that the greatest calling of all is to be an answer, not a theological answer, but a human one, to be the embrace that comes before the question, to be the ear that listens to what no one else wanted to hear, to be a sign that there is still time. This is the gospel Jesus taught me without saying a single word, and so, even while my body was still frail, I began to walk different paths, not on stages, but in alleyways, in forgotten homes, and amidst stories I had once judged without truly knowing them. I began to hear confessions that would have once bothered me. I saw shattered women sharing their stories of abortion. I saw weary men facing their addictions. I saw teenagers weeping because they felt unworthy of God. And this time, I did not interrupt, I did not correct, and I did not quote scripture. I listened, I wept with them. I said, I, too, needed to be broken to understand His love. And in those conversations, Jesus appeared again, not in visible glory, but in true compassion, because He appears whenever love proves stronger than judgment, and that is what healed me. Not the heaven I once saw, but the Jesus I now see in every wounded person he loves. For me, the Bible became something more. The very same verses now speak of things I hadn't seen before. What once felt like an imposition now brings liberation. John 3:16 remains at the center. But now it pulses with life and becomes flesh. It is no longer just a verse about future salvation, but a verse about rescue. It is now the backbone of my faith, a reminder that God's entire eternal plan revolves around a love that never gives up. And if God doesn't give up on anyone, who am I to quit? Who am I to exclude, divide, or label others? Romans 8 has become my anchor. There is no longer any condemnation. These words sustained me when I wanted to judge myself, when guilt tried to creep back in, and when the old voice of religion whispered that I was becoming weak, stagnant, and wayward. But the Spirit who restored my life does not accuse. He guides with tenderness, showing me that those who are in Christ do not live trapped in the past, they live in the present. Now is the time for reconciliation and restoration, for letting the Spirit breathe where there were once too many rules and too little grace. Today, I walk a different path. Even the way I view people has changed. I used to see problems, but now I see stories. I used to look for faults. Today, I look for wounds to heal. I used to talk a lot. Now I have learned to listen. Because faith does not enter through arguments, it enters through love. It is not what imposes change, it is what endures even when change has not yet arrived. It is what persists when everything says there is no way out. It is what sees beyond appearances and says, there is still time. And this is the gospel I want to live out until my last breath. If I could go back, I would do things differently. But since I can't, I've decided to start over from this moment on. And if you are listening to this and feel that you, too, have been hurt in the name of faith, you need to know this. It is time to start over, not to throw everything away, but to let Jesus remake you in his own way, with love, truth, and mercy. And if someone has hurt you the way I was hurt, I ask for your forgiveness on behalf of those who used the Bible as a weapon. Because today I understood that the gospel isn't meant for striking blows, it is meant for restoration, for embracing once more. And if Jesus still embraces you, who am I to do anything else? John 3:16 stayed with me. It was no longer just a text on a church wall or a verse memorized in Sunday school. It had become my backbone, my lifeblood, my vision, because God so loved the world. But what does that mean when you come face to face with someone whom religion has taught you to exclude? It means that love comes before change, that God's embrace comes before the right clothes, the right speech, or acceptable behavior. And that set me free, because for years I thought it was my responsibility to sanctify the world. Now I understand, my mission is to love as I have been loved. I began to see Jesus again between the lines of everyday life. Not in the fire of worship, but in the silence of an unexpected visit, not in the shout from the pulpit, but in the whisper of someone saying, I thought God had forgotten me. I started going to places I had never gone before, hospitals, shelters, and streets where religion doesn't usually venture, and I saw his presence there, more alive than in many liturgy-filled gatherings, dirty, forgotten, invisible people showing me what it means to be seen by Jesus, showing me that John 3:16 includes everyone, without exception, without filters, and without spiritual pedigree. Deep down, I still felt shattered, yet I discovered that it is from that very place that Jesus uses us most. For when you know what it means to be restored, you stop wanting to be a judge and start wanting to be a bridge. I stopped being a pastor in the traditional sense. Today, I feel more like a handkerchief in the hands of the Spirit. He goes where he needs to go, and I simply follow. I no longer worry about the opinions of the religious. I care about the eyes of the wounded, the hands trembling as they wait for someone who won't judge them before listening to them. And this is the gospel I live by now, a gospel that bleeds in order to heal. There are days when I miss what I experienced, that light, that peace, that presence that did not accuse, but redeemed. Sometimes I wake up at night and weep, not out of sadness, but out of reverence, because I was there. I stood before the author of life, and he did not destroy me. He laid me bare to transform me, and if he raised me up, It was because there was still work to be done. There are still people who need to hear that John 3:16 is more than just a slogan. It is the answer the world seeks in all the wrong places, and if I do not proclaim this with my life, my mouth no longer has the right to speak. Looking back today, I realize I was too harsh with those who simply needed to be heard. I know scars remain, but I also know that Jesus cares for those people, and perhaps one day, when they hear my story, they will understand. The one who was once wounded can also be healed, for grace takes no sides, it is no team and shows no favoritism. And if someone has hurt you the way I was hurt, I urge you not to abandon Jesus because of someone who misused his name, for he is so much more. He is love combined with justice, truth, tenderness, and mercy that transforms. That is why I press on, even when I am afraid, even when there are voices of opposition. Because I saw Jesus, and he didn't tell me to preach louder, he told me to love more deeply. He didn't give me a new ministry, he gave me a new heart, and with that heart, I can do only one thing, walk with my eyes open and my arms wide open. And if you are still listening to this story, perhaps it is not in vain. Perhaps today is the day John 3:16 stops being just a verse to you and becomes a living revelation. Because this love still waits with open arms, and you may not even realize it, but you are already being called. The Bible remains the same book, yet for me, it has become something different. Every page holds a sound I hadn't perceived before, every verse conveys a spirit I hadn't known. I used to use the texts as tools for correction, now, they correct me. I used to memorize them to teach, now, I immerse myself in them to be molded, and in the process, John 3:16 has become the center of it all. It is as if everything from Genesis to Revelation were a single cry, for God so loved, and that changes everything, because love is not merely part of the message, it is the message itself. Reading the Bible again after what I had been through was like learning a new language. I read with tears in my eyes and an open heart. Every word found its place. Words I had once used against others now came back to me. John, Luke, Matthew, Romans, Ephesians, James. They all proclaimed the same thing. It is not about merit, but mercy. It is not about results, but the heart. The gospel was never a system of control. It was always a plan for reconciliation, and if I hadn't understood it before, it was impossible not to see it now. I asked myself how I could have spent so much time preaching without seeing the very heart of the cross. The answer was painful but clear. It is easy to hide behind the outward appearance of faith and never let the gospel penetrate the places where it hurts the most. Religion can protect one's image, but only Jesus can transform one's essence, and when he transforms, nothing stays where it was. He changes the way we walk and the way we speak. But what changes most is our gaze. Today, I look at every person and wonder, have they ever heard of this true love, unfiltered, unburdened, and without walls? It is no longer about inviting people to church, it is about being a church where no one is expected to jump through hoops. It is about being present and letting your very life become a path for others. And if you must raise your voice, let it be to say, there is still time, there is still grace, and there are still open arms waiting for you. Because I saw it, I was there, I was laid bare to the very core, and instead of condemnation, I received a verdict that pierced me through. You understand nothing, and yet, I love you. Nothing has been the same since, not the Bible, nor prayer, nor is my mission today. Praying for myself isn't about asking for anything, it is saying, show me who needs you through me. Sometimes it happens in a supermarket, sometimes in a hug that lasts longer than usual, sometimes in a respectful silence. In every instance, it is the same Jesus revealing himself, for he continues to walk toward the forgotten, to wipe away hidden tears, and to say, in the silence, I haven't given up on you. And this is the sound I now carry in my heart, not as a sermon, but as a way of existing. If one day someone asks me what I learned from all this, I will say with conviction, even though the Bible's best-known verse is also the most ignored, that if we truly understood it, there wouldn't be so much hatred in churches, so much division among brothers, or so much religiosity masquerading as holiness. John 3:16 is the key that opens all the doors we have closed against ourselves. I know this because he showed me, not with words, but through presence, through vulnerability, and through healing. From that point on, everything became a mission. I no longer preach as I once did. I no longer raise my voice or wield the microphone like a sword. I don't need to, not anymore. My preaching manifests in how I listen, in the time I give, and in respecting the silence of those still trying to understand their own feelings. I discovered that Jesus didn't resurrect me to make me more eloquent. He resurrected me to make me more human, more like him, and being like him means letting go of control, letting grace go first, and being willing to love even when the other person is still struggling. Some ask me, do you still believe in what you used to preach? And I answer calmly, believing more than ever. But now I understand that the truth that sets you free never arrives without mercy. True repentance comes when the soul feels loved, not threatened. Heaven is moved not by performance, but by brokenness, and that isn't manufactured through liturgy. It happens when someone has the courage to take off the mask and say, I need you. I was that person. I had to die, inside and out, to grasp the gospel I thought I knew. To this day, I bear the physical consequences of all that. My speech isn't always steady. Sometimes my hands tremble. My body still feels it, but it doesn't hinder me. It reminds me, anchoring me in every limitation. It forces me to remember that strength doesn't come from me. It comes from him, and that the power of a testimony lies not in perfection, but in truth, because what transforms people isn't charisma, it's authenticity. It's when you speak from the heart, not with rehearsed lines. And if these traits are now part of me, I've learned to show them unashamedly, for they are what made me a true disciple. I don't return to the places where I used to preach in the same way. I can't. There are pulpits that still call to me, but today, before stepping up, I ask, is there room for grace at this altar? No, I'll stay right there, down low. Because the altar Jesus showed me was the ground. It was the place where knees bowed, the space between judgment and acceptance where he reached out his hand. And if I can't do that again, reach out without demanding anything in return, then I'd rather remain silent, because today, what I fear most isn't someone else's mistake, but my own heart hardening all over again. And perhaps that's why you're here now, listening to all this, because maybe you've hardened, too. Maybe you think you need to earn God's love. Or perhaps you've been hurt by those who claim to speak for him. I've been both. The one who suffered and the one who needed healing. That's why I tell you, John 3:16 isn't a message for the perfect, it's the key God uses to reach those at their breaking point, the weary, those who just want to know if an embrace still awaits them on the other side. And that embrace remains open. There is still time, a table is still set, there is still a cross that says, I died for you. Not for the version of yourself you show the world, but for who you are deep inside, where no one else sees. And if everything you've heard so far has moved you in some way, then perhaps today is the day you stop running, stop trying to fit in and simply surrender, because that's what Jesus taught me. Whoever truly surrenders is never the same again, nor do they need to be, because when he touches us, the old dies and the new is born. If I had died that day and never returned, this story might never have reached you. But God willed it to be different, and now I understand why. It wasn't so I could be celebrated as a miracle, but so my fall could reveal the greatness of Jesus' love. He didn't bring me back with a new calling, he simply showed me what had always been there, a single verse containing everything we need to understand about God. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, that it was exactly, that destroyed and remade me. And perhaps today he is knocking at your door, too. I could have ended that night in a coffin, broken, with a crowd cheering my faithfulness to the very end, but Jesus knew the truth. I wasn't truly faithful, I was faithful only to the image of him I had created, yet he loved me enough to confront me before my final breath. He showed me I didn't need more verses on my lips, I needed the Spirit within me. I didn't need more authority, I needed a new heart. And if he gave me the chance to return, it is because this story isn't just mine, it's yours, too. It is for those who need to start over, without fear or shame, if you carry religious burdens, if you've ever used the Bible as a shield, if you've ever been the accuser or the accused, if you've ever hurt or been hurt in the name of faith, I want you to know, you are still loved, not with a conditional love, but with that "for God so loved the world" kind of love, the love that doesn't ask where you went wrong, but reaches out a hand to lift you up. It is a surgical love. It cuts, yes, but only to remove what is killing you inside. It hurts, but it heals. It exposes, but it restores. Don't wait until everything is sorted out to draw near to Him. There I was, standing at the altar with a Bible in my hand and pride in my heart, and yet, He found me, stopped me, pulled me close, and showed me the truth. Then He gave me a mission, to actually live out what I had always preached but never practiced, and that is what I try to do now, every day, with stumbles and limitations, but with a new heart, the one He gave me Himself, the one that truly feels, that listens, that embraces, that no longer runs from those who are different. Because now I understand John 3:16, it is true, and so, everything changes. If you've made it this far, it's not just because you watched the whole thing. Perhaps it's because the Spirit of God wants to remind you of something you've forgotten. Maybe it's love, maybe forgiveness, or perhaps just the courage to say, I don't want to live far away anymore. Whatever it is, respond, not to me, but to Him. Leave a comment below, even if it's just one word, because your comment could be the push someone needs, or the sign someone else is praying for. And if this video reached you, don't let this moment pass, because the love that brought